Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us today and attending this event sponsored by the Society of Professional Journalists, the New England chapter particularly. My name is Loretta McGraw. I am a freelance journalist and I am the coordinator for Region 7 here with SPJ. And tonight I am delighted to have us joined here with Erik Wemple. He is a star media reporter and critic for the Washington Post and is the author of the Erik Wemple blog. I'm going to be putting a note here in the chat function here momentarily. I just wanted to let anyone know that's joining the room that we are going to be having an open Q&A session as well. So just pop any questions you have for Wemple or anything related to ethics on this topic today in the chat as it comes to mind. So Wemple also just assists the Post with editorials on regional matters. Prior to joining the Post, he worked with the failed Washington area local news site TBD.com. And before that, he served 8 years as the editor of Washington City Paper. So he's going to be talking to us tonight about media ethics. And Erik, I'd like to thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
All right. So I know it's been a wild week for ethics, and since that's what we're talking about, I just wanted to first talk a little bit about you and let our audience know that we are going to be talking again about ethics. So let's just first start off with, how did you get into journalism and how does that relate into your career as a whole?
Yeah, I got into journalism, God, it must have been the late 80s, early 90s. I worked at a export consulting firm, and they had a newsletter that covered export controls. You may hear some squeaking in the background with my dog. Sorry about that. But for export controls, which basically, don't send, back then it was don't send high-powered computers to the Soviet Union because we fear that it will boost their military capabilities. And, we used to outlaw the export of those, those fun like Kodak underwater cameras that you shoot at the pool. We couldn't send them to Iran because we were worried that people would try to use them to plant mines in the harbors. So it was stuff like that. That was the more fun stuff, but most of it was really dry, but interesting and fun to do reporting and writing. So I wrote a lot of the newsletter, and then living here in DC, I became interested in local affairs, and so I started writing about just stuff around town, crime, culture, politics, everything. And I got kind of hooked on local journalism and eventually became the political columnist for the city paper, the Loose Lips columnist for the Washington City Paper. And then ultimately, like in 2002, I became the editor. And then from there, just covered a lot of media. So, and then later joined the Post. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. Actually, since you kind of talked about Loose Lips, let's go back to that. So how long was it after your move to Washington that you got involved with that Washington City Paper, Loose Lips?
Oh, that's a good question. I came here in 87. I started writing for the city paper like in 93 and 94. So it was about 6 years, I guess. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people, I was really excited about it because I think a lot of people come to DC and don't ever really immerse themselves in the local stuff and the local politics. I mean, especially then, was fascinating. I mean, you had Marion Barry. He had gone off to prison, and then he came back, made his great comeback, and then he, wasn't given a hell of a lot of chance in that term. They put the control board in to take over the city, and there was just turmoil everywhere, and people arguing and debating, and the politics was really, really, really lively. And now DC is a different kettle of fish. It's it's a much different city than it was then. But it's always been interesting. And so you see some of the old themes starting to pop back up. Congress is starting to meddle in our affairs again, which they have the right to do. DC is not a state, and we do not have full enfranchisement. So that's a problem. Anyway, I don't want to sermonize. You asked.
Yeah, no problem. I really appreciate that input. Actually, you were talking about some of the trends that you're seeing from when you first started versus what you're seeing today, and some of that meddling, especially with DC, of course. But was there anything particular that you had like a column or you wrote about that you're seeing come back to the forefront of media in today's day and age?
That's interesting because, when I first started covering DC, it was the Republican Revolution, Newt Gingrich. I wasn't writing on politics at that time, but one of Newt Gingrich's things was he was wanted to try out all of his great Republican ideas on the district, because they had, the Constitution gives Congress authority over the district, so they can veto our bills, they can force us to do certain things, they can get people to sponsor stuff and then try to push it on us, and they have a tremendous amount of authority over the district. And Newt Gingrich, I think we had City Paper. I wasn't the editor, but we did a City Paper, Newt Gingrich's experiment, and showed him, with a test tube in the district, trying to get all of his ideas through here. Charter schools, I think, was one of them, and all kinds of, I think, taxation ideas and so on and so forth. Not all of them ever made it, but he did like town halls around here in the district, trying to show his interest in, bringing Republican ideas to the district. Nowadays, they're just trying to stop our crime reform, our criminal justice reform. And I must say that our mayor has vetoed that bill too. But it's one thing for local officials to dissent from something. It's quite another to have people from Oklahoma or California or wherever it is saying, no, DC, you can't do this or that. So that would be the echo that I see.
Yeah, well then I am curious. So if you weren't initially in the interest of things as far as political sphere, what originally made you go into journalism? Where was your original passion, and how did you see that unfold into kind of these big figureheads that we talked to today, both between your interviews with other media stars and journalists and also with individuals of public importance?
So you're asking, how did I get interested in all this?
Yeah, how did you switch from just kind of a general interest in journalism to specifically having this importance on media ethics and political sphere?
Oh, well, I mean, when I became editor of City Paper, it had been a tradition at that point that the editor would cover media. Jack Schaefer had done it, David Carr had done it. I think there was a lapse that Howard Witt didn't do it. He was the one who directly preceded me. But there was a tradition that person would cover media. And the more I got into the job, the more it made sense, because you'd be talking to other journalists and they would give you ideas and, sort of sharpen your own ability to manage a newsroom. So there was that tradition. And so I just started covering media at the City Paper. I covered like every week or every other week, write columns and stuff. And it became, it became a thing to do. And it became, it became all right. And I just kept doing it for 8 years. And so then, after 8 years, I guess it's sort of your beat, and you don't necessarily want to, once you've sunk 8 years into something, it's, you're already in your 40s or whatever. I just decided I would stick with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Definitely. Once you've already invested the time, you've put an interest in investment in yourself, as well as the relationship with the paper and the community as well. I did want to kind of talk to you about your role there as a supervisor and what it kind of looked like taking over the paper, and where ethics came into play as a factor in you leading the team as a whole, because you're not responsible for just your own publishing, but you're also responsible for what everyone in your team says.
Yeah, I mean, my main ethical push at the City Paper was to push up the number of corrections we wrote. And that sounds like a real dumb thing, because why would you do that? Nobody wants corrections. And my whole, and I outlined this on my first day, was I'd always felt that, and I believe this industry-wide, I believe we are a very undercorrected industry. In other words, I feel that editors and reporters constantly and continuously suppress correctable material. And they don't publish corrections when they're warranted, and they're always looking for excuses not to publish a correction. So I told my colleagues at the City Paper that you would not be punished for screwing up, for making a mistake, because I've done it, you've done it, everybody's done it. No one will be punished. There's amnesty for making a mistake. I did make the point that if you have 8 corrections in 3 consecutive stories, that particular provision might have to lapse. But the punishment, such as it is, or the consequences would come from suppressing a correction. Because we all know what happens in journalism is that a source or someone out there or your friend or whatever says, hey, this is wrong. And it might be the case that nobody else will ever like bust you on it. So you could probably slide without a correction. And I made it very clear from the beginning that that wouldn't fly. And that if you were caught, that would be a fireable offense. So that was something, that was the main initial ethical sort of thing that we did. But the ethics, I think, that if that's the focus here, ethics is something that it's not just like, it's something that's continuous. It has to be talked about all the time. It has to be talked about in every staff meeting. It has to be, fleshed out in that way. I would ask people who ran into tough little ethical pickles, to come to the staff meeting and to give a short presentation about what they had run into. I just think that it's constant. It's just like anything. It's like dental work. You just want to constantly keep brushing your teeth, and I think it's the same with ethics.
Yeah, interesting perspective. I wouldn't have thought of it as brushing your teeth, but it's definitely in the same boat. You got to make sure you keep up with things and keep correct so that you're not always having the mistakes
Right.
after the fact. But if you do have a mistake, I like that you adopted it into your newsroom, that it's better to be upfront and forward about it than to try to just stuff it under rug, because we know that can cause so many problems down the road.
Well, let me just riff a little more. There are places that do this sort of thing, like that'll like say, hey, it's been 3 weeks since we've had a correction, and it's like, no, that's the wrong message to send. You should, I don't mean you shouldn't have throw a cake party or something for running a correction, but but when you say that, you incentivize people not to disclose their corrections. That is a problem. And so, look, the point about constant maintenance too is that you can't just write an ethics guidelines, right? A set of ethics guidelines and just leave them there for people, and say this is our ethics to prove that we have ethical conduct here, because people have to abide by it. I mean, at the Post, you have to. There's like every year, I don't know how long, you have to reread the ethics stuff and so on and so forth. I think that's a pretty important exercise, even though it's like, oh shit, I got to read that same thing again. But they make sure that you do it. You have to click and you read and you click and you read and you go through the system. That's helpful, but it needs to be more than that. And I think they know that it needs to be more than that. The Fox News, we just had a filing. Fox News doesn't even have ethics guidelines. They don't have guidelines. CNN has like a 200-page guidelines, but they won't publish it. In fact, one of the stories I covered about CNN was that they won't release to the public, they won't even release to someone who's suing them what their guidelines are. And so they had the court suppress it. They had to redact their guidelines. Every news organization should publish their goddamn guidelines. I mean, there's no excuse for that. Like, it's boring stuff. One of the reasons why they don't want to publish their guidelines is because they don't want people to call them out on contradictions or their own violations of their own guidelines. But I think that's one of the prices you have to pay for being a journalist. If you want to court the public trust, you need to give people an understanding of what your values are. I think that the dividing line there is between print outlets and most TV outlets. If you look at many or most or print outlets, they'll, like the Post, the Times, many others, many of the chains, they'll put their guidelines right up on the web, and you can see their principles. Television outlets prefer or tend not to, or less, I should say. So sorry for just sort of monologuing there, but
No, you're absolutely fine. This is insightful information and it's important for all of our viewers, and it's educational too. So it's always good to hear about that. Kind of speaking on those principles, I guess you would say, we have a general understanding of what the idea of ethical journalism is. But since with your position currently, since you're doing a lot of like op-ed work with the post? How does that come into play? Are you really just kind of managing yourself, or what makes it, I guess, what principles are you constantly and consistently following to make sure that your reporting is the best it can be? And do you oftentimes find yourself making any kind of contradictions again or corrections?
I mean, I wouldn't say I do tons of corrections, but I do try to follow my own credo. And you know, when my editors are on the fence about something, I do try to say, let's err on the side of publishing a correction. I am pretty much I mean, things have changed since I joined the Post. When I joined the Post in 2011, I think it was, I was blogging as a media guy, and I would send my copy to the copy editor, and it would go straight up online. Now I have at least 1 or 2 layers of editing, sometimes 3 or 4. If there's a legal edit, 5 or 6 layers of editing before my stuff goes up on the site. So there's a lot more editorial intervention than there was before. I think that maybe in 2011, you know, there was still leftovers of the blog period when the idea was quick, get it up there, you know, iterate, keep moving the story. It's changed. It's gone back to a more traditional model. And, you know, I do some, I help out with the editorial board. That's also an extensive process. But, you know, for the longest time, I was basically very much, as much as anybody really in the mainstream media, I was very much responsible for my own stuff. Like, I would come up with my own ideas. I'd write my own headlines. I'd write the post, fact check it, and then copy edit, and then it would go up. As I say, there's a little more, there's a little too much more editorial intervention now, but still I'm pretty much, you know, I pretty much call my shots. I have a very good set of editors who help me along and give me suggestions and so on and so forth. But, you know, it's still driven by my sensibilities and so on and so forth. So, you know, and then, you know, you had asked about like sort of ethical things that I have. One of the other things I did at City Paper was made sure that we made a really hard distinction between quoting people who are used to and experienced in the ways of media, and quoting people who are not used to and experienced in the way of media. With the latter group, which is basically people who are, you know, you interview on the street or you interview at the site of a calamity, emergency, a killing, or, you know, a fire or whatever, those people get their quotes read back to them if they ask. You know, we offer to read their quotes back to them, give them the full context and so on and so forth. And, you know, spokespeople, politicians and stuff don't necessarily get that same treatment. We can give them that treatment if we want, but, you know, and if there are people out there that aren't experienced in the way of media, gave us their name and then call us and say, can you pull my name from that? I have this other consideration. Absolutely. We don't get high and mighty about, oh, that was on the record. That was on the record. You know what on the record means? You know, we don't do that. I try to instill an idea that we don't do that with people who don't interact with the media all the time. That's how people get burned. You talk to a lot of people in the world out there. Just you go to a convention or whatever, and you talk to attendees. Why don't you like the media? Oh, because they screwed my one friend over that one time. You know, there's a lot of people out there like that, and not all of those stories are, not all of those stories necessarily check out. Not all of them are very compelling, but a significant amount of them, I believe, are. And so I think media, we get out of journalism school, or we go into and say, oh, that's on the record. And, you know, I think it's important to hold politicians, public figures to that standard. And I think there's an ethical problem on the flip side of it. And that ethical problem is that when we talk to spokespeople and politicians, journalists are too quick to go off the record or on background with people who should not be given that level of privilege. because they should not be given every opportunity to spin us off the record. I think that's, an ethical question. I think it's a real ethical question. Like, I forgot what it was The Verge, or there was I think it was a tech site that announced at some point that they would no longer allow spokespeople to give their statements on background, that if they wouldn't put their name behind it, that they would not use the statement, which is kind of revolutionary, because it makes sure, like, when that spokespeople at companies, they constantly say you can use this attributable to a spokesperson, or you can use it attributable to Fox News, or you can use it attributable to Pfizer. And they think that's on the record. They're like, this is an on the record statement from the company. But a statement isn't on the record until it's tied to a person. And that person, the reason why those people don't want to put their name to these things is because they don't want their reputation to go down with a shitty statement, or a mendacious statement, or a tendentious statement, or a nasty, cruel statement. But they're happy to put the company name behind it because no one directly loses their reputation. So anyway, there's a few things. I guess you wanted to focus on ethics, right? I mean, or am I wrong?
It's a kind of a mix of both. You're a great matter of, as far as ethics go here on the scene of journalism. You're very well renowned as far as that's concerned, but you have a lot of experience as a forerunner there in DC as well, in Washington, and with all of our local papers that you've been a part of. You've got a lot of experience to insight upon us that is very valuable. So anything that you're willing to bring to the table and discuss with us today, we're happy to be able to be involved. I did know we were going to have a couple more questions. I just wanted to reiterate, any questions that you guys have, just send them through in the chat. It can be open to everyone or privately, and then I'll get those asked as they come up. But I did want to kind of talk about some of those ethical dilemmas that you were mentioning. Would you say, since you've been in the journalism industry for so long, that you're seeing it become more difficult to be an ethical journalist today than in decades past, or there are more dilemmas being faced as far as where they're publishing? Because you talked about kind of, if it's behind the paper's name, it's not as risky person, versus, a blogger or somebody who's doing freelance work. All of that weight falls back onto them. Do you think it's more or pretty much the same as far as difficulty goes with those ethical dilemmas in today's journalism industry?
That's a good question. I think that as the internet becomes more and more complicated, social media continues marching forward, there are probably more ethical issues that arise, simply because you have to decide how to handle, like, these comments that come out of nowhere, and this entire industry about doxing and redacting stuff that could out people is more intense now. There's more of that than there ever has been. So every time you take something off the web, there's Hunter Biden recently was shown that his laptop, like, all the materials from his laptop contain personal information about Hunter Biden. And you have to look at that and say, should I redact that? What do I need to do that to maintain this person's privacy? Obviously, he's a public figure, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't deserve privacy. He does deserve privacy. I think that those situations have made ethical issues explode, essentially. And it's really easy to screw that up, because you're thinking about getting your facts right and so on and so forth. You're thinking about fact and fantasy and myth and staying away from the conspiracy theories. And there's a redaction issue. I hadn't thought about that. So I think it is more complicated than ever. And sometimes you don't even know where the complications are. That's the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I did want to give a couple of questions here, it looks like, from the participants. They were interested if you have a formal role of helping your paper currently through addressing ethical issues. We talked a little bit about some of the principles of it, and how different organizations have different codes of ethics. Do you have one that you particularly follow, or is just kind of vary?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't have a formal role in assisting, the post management with ethics. They pretty much roll the way they roll on that. And if they, if they screw up, sometimes I'll write about it. I am allowed to write about the post, and I've done it dozens of times, I think is fair to say. But they have editors who are charged with that, and I think that they might fear that if they disclosed to me their ethical problems, I might write about it. So I'm a journalist first and foremost, not an ethicist. So yeah, no, I don't play an editorial role that way. Sometimes other journalists do come in and ask me, like, what about this? What about that? Can I do this? What do you think I should do? Not every day. I don't want to make it sound like I'm some sort of industry resource, but people are well advised to talk to their peers about these things. What was the second part of that question? What guidelines do I like?
Yeah, do you have any personal guidelines that you kind of are prone to following, or you sit down when you're composing your story and you just want to make sure that you hit the mark on A, B, and C, etc.?
Yeah, I kind of like the SPJ award journal guidelines. I like those. I constantly refer to them to see if I think something is wrong in the industry. They're well promoted and well circulated, and I think they're relatively brief, right? Like they're not like 15,000 words. I like the Times too. I think the Times is really thorough and thoughtful, and it has a lot of stuff about business ethics, which is important. One thing I would say is I'm not a fan of these appearance ethics stuff. Like, this gives the appearance of an ethical violation. I think that if we comply very judiciously, completely, and honestly with the existing, sort of like ethics regulations, I don't think that we should be responsible for appearances. Like if something looks a little off, but it isn't. I think that limits journalists too much. And I think it's a slippery slope that puts people in bad positions. And if it isn't a conflict of interest, for example, then the person should do the story. And if it looks icky, it looks icky. But I'm sorry, I'm just not a big person on the appearances. But yeah, I think that most of the ones that are published are really well thought through. The biggest, and this isn't really an ethical thing, but it may be an ethical thing if you stretch the definition, is the decency standards. The decency standards really bother me because I think it's unethical on some level to present readers with these, abbreviations and this bullshit that we do in order to disguise the swear words and the profanities that people use in their real life. And we force people to figure out, we put these brackets and these dashes and all this other stuff, these hyphens. And sometimes you can't even figure out what the person said. And it's like you have to go back online. If I'm reading the print version, you go online, you got to do a search, whatever. And you got to figure out what the person said. And it's like, no, we're adults here. Who are we protecting? I have two young, my kids are growing up, but, they knew all these words. Come on. Anyway, so that's one of my peeves. Sorry for these long answers. I know you want to get some questions in, so I'll try to limit myself, and you should interrupt.
Okay, yeah, no problem. So another quick question that we've got from the group, for those of us who are just joining, we're here with Erik Wemple. He works with the Washington Post currently, and we're kind of talking about the discussion of ethics, but this is open to anyone asking any questions, so just pop those in the chat as they become something on your mind. But I did want to throw this one out here. What should we as an industry do about Fox News? It seems that their business model requires them to lie, said one of our participants. What would you recommend we do as an industry?
I just think that's the greatest question. I just want to pause there. That is a great question. and it's something I've puzzled over. Today, I got a text from someone who's who's in television media and pretty prominent, who was like, what's the White House Correspondents Association do about Fox News? We need to do something. And I'm not so sure. Because look what's happening to Fox News right now, okay? They publish lies they've published lies pretty much since they've been broadcasting, right? But they published lies on this particular topic, the election theft, from basically November 6th or November 5th or whatever, maybe even before that. But all the way through, I don't know, it was 3 or 4 weeks of solid lie fest about the election. And I think that they took these voting technology companies and they just put them into the wash, because they are so drunk on our media liberties. They have been habituated that they could never be touched, because they can slam Hillary, Obama, they can slam all these Democratic politicians with utter impunity. So they figured they could do the same to Dominion and Smartmatic, these two voting technology companies that they basically bundled into the stolen election lie. That's what happened. And so they did that systematically. And now what's happening? They're getting their asses sued, right? 1.6 billion in one, 2.7 in the other, maybe. Don't quote me on that. But it's a lot of money. And these companies are not huge. I don't think that they'll get that kind of money. But the $1 billion signs, the $1 billion totals behind the ask, I think, are commensurate with the amount of lies, right? Like, this is a $1.6 billion in lies. May not be $1.6 billion in damages, but it's $1.6 billion in lies. You could bet on it that these complaints are like 140 and 250 pages each, and it's not because the lawyers were like prolix and discursive. It's because they had that many lies to put in the complaint. There were so many lies on Fox News that you had to put the transcript. That's why these complaints are so long. Usually you don't want your complaint to go over 40, 50 pages, because lawyers say, people stop paying attention. But honestly, Fox forced these complaints to be this long. Okay, so I'm getting a little bit overboard here. But anyway, the point is that they are facing consequences. So in a sense, justice is afoot. Now think about what would happen if we decided as an industry, like you and I, we got together at SPJ talking about this, and then I go back to the Post and talk to somebody, and then, and then we decide to do something. Like, let's just say that we appealed to the White House Correspondents Association to take away Peter Doocy's seat in the White House briefing room. I don't know how good I'd feel about that. I think he's kind of a jerk, but he asks some really important questions once in a while. And do we really want to be policing in that way? Do we really want, we all cast judgment at Fox News. We all rip them for their programming decisions. But don't we want our actions in this industry to be journalistic? In other words, we write stories. We don't convene councils and decide we're going to vote somebody off the aisle. We write stories. That's what you do. That's what I do. That's our job. That's how we express our power. That's how we express. So I think that what we do is keep covering the story. And I don't think that I thought about this. At one point I was considering, should we say the White House Correspondents Association should do something? And I'm like, nah, I don't feel comfortable with that. I feel comfortable covering the story. That's what we do. But it's a great question, because it's obvious that there is a real problem here. A lot of people have said, what's the FCC going to do? But the FCC doesn't really regulate Fox News. Fox News is a cable provider. They don't go out over the public airwaves. So the FCC doesn't do something. And even if they did, I don't think the FCC would I don't want to get into that, but it's just, that's not an option.
Yeah, I definitely say on that note, there's tons of different organizations that you can say they can do this or they can do that, but the legitimacy of actually putting it into play and making a change and seeing how that impacts us as journalists is going to be a whole different thing. And that would be a lot to unpack, and it's going to be more than we have time for today. But I did, on that note, kind of want to ask you, with your relationship with Fox News, of course, we see that Tucker Carlson is a little bit infatuated with you. And I did want to kind of know or ask you about some of the correspondence that's been revealed, where there's emails and texts from some of those Fox biggest stars, including Carlson, that show they know those claims were false and that there was no stolen election. Has anything like this ever happened at a news outlet before, to your knowledge, or what can we really see unfolding as this continues to be in the light of everything as far as the Dominion voting system defamation case goes?
That's another great question. Another great question. I think that, so let's take a step back and look what's happened here. Two news organizations, two voting technology companies sued Fox News. They got beyond the motion to dismiss stages. They've been in discovery with Fox News for months now. Discovery can be a tremendously piercing and intrusive process. They get their text messages, they get their emails, they get all kinds of stuff from within Fox News. This is particularly important for Fox News because people like me, Brian Stelter, Gabriel Sherman did an entire book on Roger Ailes, okay? He did the conclusive biography on Roger Ailes, who was the founder of Fox News. And it was published, I forgot exactly when, but maybe 2014, maybe 2015, maybe someone can look it up, but it was published in the mid 2010s. So, and this was like a 500 or 600 page book. It was excellent. And he had in there one episode from decades before where Roger Ailes had made some overtures or done something sexual harassment-ish with, I think it was sexual harassment, I forgot exactly what it was. But it was highly unethical, highly problematic, really bad. But he published that book, whole book, about a year or two, I think, before Roger Ailes was ultimately exposed as a serial sexual harasser at Fox News. Like some of it was so misogynistic, so torturous. There was this woman, Lori Loon, who he tormented for a real long period of time. The stuff is bone chilling. And he didn't get that. And he's a phenomenal reporter. This is not a criticism of him. I didn't get it either. Stelter didn't get it. All of us, none of us got it. The point there of all of this is that Fox News has been a tremendously opaque organization for its entire history. It has wrapped people in these NDAs. It did this earlier and better than any other news organization. The people learn from Fox News. So when you get two voting technology companies that get discovery on Fox News, get their text messages, get their email, this was a tremendous motherlode and will continue to be for as long as this proceeding lasts. So this is enormous just from that perspective. I mean, back in like 2011, 2012, Joe Muto, you may remember this, there was this guy who stole a piece of video from Fox News, an employee, put it out there like via Gawker. And there was a little video of Romney hanging out with Bret Baier before an interview. And there was something slightly embarrassing about it. Well, this was the mole, Fox News mole. He proceeded to write a book about being a mole in Fox News. And it was just these little stories about Bill O'Reilly in the bathroom and, these stupid little stories. They didn't really amount to much, but everybody ate them up because nobody ever got information from inside Fox News. That's how precious it is. And the discovery alone through these civil suits, through these complaints, is amazingly insightful. And so we get the actual thoughts of these guys in real time about news, and it's horrific. It's worse than even I thought. Because you have Tucker Carlson asking for someone to be fired for doing an honest to goodness, real good fact check. Now, if you're talking about ethics, there's nothing, that's not even ethical, that's immoral. Forget ethics, that's morality. I mean, you're asking for someone to get fired? Here you are, a multi-millionaire, you're an heir to a fish fry fortune, the Swanson, he's an heir to that thing. And he's asking for some young woman to get fired because she's doing a good job. I mean, that is beyond belief. That is beyond belief. That is just so far off the hook. And it's really telling about our about the way we've come to expect Fox News to operate. We give them a pass, everybody's all that is Fox News. That's just what they do. Our expectations are so low, but that's outrageous. And then the CEO of the organization writes that this woman had some nerve to be fact-checking her own news organization. It's just, Loretta, this is historic. This is historic. But make no mistake, it may be historic, but it's not bringing down Fox News anytime soon.
Yeah, we definitely say this, we're going to continue to see in the headlines, and we're going to all probably be closely following along to see what comes out with this Dominion voting system defamation case against Fox News. I don't also foresee it going down with just this one case. It would take a lot more than just this independent situation, but we can always hope for the best, that this will be a learning opportunity at the very least.
Right.
All right. Well, I did want to kind of talk a little bit more about your relationship with Tucker Carlson. Back in 2017, you actually did appear on his show, and he's since printed your likeness all over things just to kind of rile up the stands and get everybody interested in this. But was there a reason? What was the motivation behind going on Fox News to begin with, knowing that they're not as credible as some other sources?
Well, are you trying to suggest it was a real dumb thing to do?
I'm curious as to what kind of prompted that decision. I wouldn't say it was dumb, but it was definitely a decision that some other journalists may not have made the decision to do just from his notoriety alone.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I think it was dumb. Right? I mean, it has to be dumb. I mean, look, just watch. Look, I mean, I guess I still was living the fantasy that somehow I could get my 2 cents in. And I'm pretty sure, Loretta, that I had reached the point where I was naive about how far he had gone. And I think I was naive about what he was up to at that particular point. So this is, Tucker Carlson took over that show in late 2016, November 2016. This is February 2017 that I come up. These are the very early months of his show, and there was a different show than it is now. He was bringing on people who were either liberal or presumed to be liberal, or people that the Fox News would frame as being liberal, and just basically beating the shit out. And not letting them talk, and jumping down their throat, and just basically a prosecutorial grilling. And I saw this a few times, but once I had experienced it and I put it all together, it was very clear what he was doing. He was just trying to beat the piss out of liberals just for the sake. And then sooner or later, anybody who's liberal, anybody with the mainstream media stopped appearing on his show. And in 2018, 2019, 2020, anybody who dissented from Tucker Carlson stopped appearing on the show, such that it's now just a groupthink. And it's what he denounces. But it's groupthink because he either can't get people to come on, or those people won't come on, or they don't even ask. So, and the New York Times has done a visual array of this. They've done a little dot array of how many times disagreements popped up on his program over the years, and they just fall off. So this is what was happening the time that he had me on. So I feel bad. I think it was a dumb decision if for no other reason than I helped him build his show with that, you know what I mean? So I think that I unwittingly and stupidly helped him build his show. But, I had an ethic of, people ask me to defend myself, people ask me to appear. I say yes. I try never to turn down one of these engagements, come what may, like you guys asked. I personally, I feel like I have teenage kids, right? I know what it's like to be ignored. So when people want to hear me, I tend to say yes. And that was sort of the thinking that went behind, going on Tucker. And, I got to shrug my shoulders at this point. It's certainly, it's a fair question. Let's put it that way. And I appreciate the diplomacy with which you asked it. But it really wasn't that a dumb fucking thing to do?
Well, then that brings the question. You try to say yes, but if he was to ever approach you again and ask you to go back on the show, what would you say and why?
Yeah, he and I have been through this. Like he asked me to come on again, and I said, look, I will come on again, but you have to correct the factual error and the tremendous falsehood that you spread during my appearance. Because what he did was he told his audience that I never write critically about the Washington Post. And I got honestly 20 or 30 URLs, and I've sent them to him. And I said, you just need to correct this. Because I don't, if he beats up on me, I don't really care. Like I work at the Post. I've got to be able to be criticized. That's not the part that bothers me. It's just the part where he lies and says you never cover the Post critic. That was in there. He's like, why don't you cover your own paper? Well, I do. and it's there. It's hard to search because it's hard to search on Google because I work at the Post, and it's hard to find the ones where I'm criticizing the Post. But if you Google like me and Marty Barron or me and Marcus Broccoli, you'll see the stuff, and it's critical. It's not like mean or anything, but I cover my own organization. I did it last month when we announced the layoffs. So I just said, look, you correct that matter, I'm back up.
Yeah, that's a very responsible way of looking at it. The ball is in his court. He needs to redact what was previously said and make that correction. And then you're more than willing to take that stage again. So that's very, very amicable of you. I can't say I would be in the same boat. All right.
Well,
I did want to just kind of throw a question out here. This is from President Claire Reagan. She wanted to know, do you think journalists should refrain from any association with politics in their private lives? For example, contribution to candidates, lawn signs, and other sorts of kind of the marketing as far as politics go.
I do. I think those are good rules. Look, I think those are actual conflicts. They're not just appearances. Like, I think that if you were running for world SPJ and chief, and I contributed to your campaign, I would feel like, damn, I want Loretta to win this. So I think it gives you skin in the game. I think it gives you a rooting interest, and I think those rooting interests are not helpful for journalism. I don't think that you can cover the story properly. And I think it's a form. I think we have a voice. We have power. We write. It's more than most people get. I don't think journalists should really be particularly, sort of like tempted. I don't see why they get such a big deal. If you want to be an activist, or if you want to be, an engaged citizen and contribute to all these campaigns, then go ahead. But I've never found it that tempting. If you have a really close friend or colleague who's gone off and gotten into politics, I think there are ways to craft, a wall off so that you're never involved in that race or involved in covering that level of politics, maybe. But I think it's a worthwhile prohibition. And I think BuzzFeed at one point allowed their people to do contributions, and some other places do. I think that once you green light that sort of activity, you're never, ever going to stop having problems. I don't think, though, that like you can't vote. Like that's bullshit. Like, you know, Len Downey was like, oh, I can't vote. By ethics. He even, this is crazy. I wrote this up in 2008. He was leaving the paper like before the election, but he didn't vote in the election after he left the paper. I think that's true. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. That's just like preening ethics, you know, preening ethical purity. So that I find to be bullshit. But, you know, it's a good question. I just think that you got to do it. You got to administer it. And I think that there's been pretty broad compliance with it across the industry recently.
Kind of on that note, I would say in your current position and in previous positions, have you ever felt that it's been important, or you've been approached in the realm of things politics to kind of stifle or not show any affiliation? And what were those experiences kind of like?
I don't think I've ever, have I been asked to stifle affiliation or stifle my?
Yeah, any kind of public affiliation as far as campaigning or as far as what you intend to do. Of course, we don't like to publish what our alignments are, but have you ever had an interaction with perhaps a peer or somebody above you in the editorial department that's kind of asked you to pay close attention or be more careful with that?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
That's good to know.
I think that people think that I'm a really big liberal because I bang on Fox News and they're often racist and, you know, mendacious coverage and so on and so forth. I'm a left-leaning person. I don't have any problem telling anybody that, but I really don't. I don't have any particular. I don't love any particular politician, and I really hate my main driver. I think is when journalists fuck up and they don't admit it. So I'll write about any organization. I don't care what their politics are. I really don't. I mean, my wife works at Mother Jones, and I've hammered Mother Jones a few times too. So, you know, it's a media beat. So the animating idea is to cover journalism and people who don't do it right, or people who do it really right and need credit or whatever. So that's a good question, but no, I haven't had that experience.
Yeah, that's great. We are running a little bit low on time, so I just wanted to reiterate to anyone who is attending that if you have any particular questions, go ahead and pop that in the chat for everyone to see, and we'll try to get to that as quickly as possible. I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but on the note of some of those reporting errors and issues as far as they go when it's considered an ethical crisis, there's probably a lot of hesitancy on journalists to challenge misinformation, disinformation, or even falsehoods, especially if they don't have a strong relationship with their editorial staff or somehow feel alienated from the rest of their team. So how would you personally recommend confronting these stories or the reporter if any kind of credibility has been called into question? Is there a way that they can do this without, you know, potentially not having the job by the time they leave the office?
I didn't get the whole nub there.
Is there a way for journalists to challenge some of that misinformation that they see, or when you know there's something that needs to be changed or edited? We've addressed the fact that something needs to be corrected as far as it goes, and once it's already live on the site, a lot of editors don't want to issue those corrections. They don't want to step back on their word and say, hey, we were wrong, so sorry about that. So how would you recommend our reporters kind of bridge that issue, bring it to the table and say, hey, I noticed this problem is here, but at what expense? Because, you know, some editors are going to be great about it and they're going to be like, let's get that correction, let's get that up and running, let's get it going. But others are going to be like, we're not going to say, don't say anything, keep it quiet, keep it very under the rug. So how would you recommend they kind of navigate that really tricky situation that they may be in as far as their employment goes for speaking up?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. I think that you've got to be pushy. You've got to be a pain in the ass. I think that to a certain extent, editors expect their reporters to be pains in the asses. Like that's one of the best traits for a reporter. So number one, be a pain in the ass. Number two, write the correction. In other words, write the correction, send it. Here's the correction, send it to email, blast your editors, get as many people, you have allies. You have allies somewhere. Send it to all your editors. Every editor that touches the copy editor, so on and so forth, you'll find other allies. Number three, put it on social media. Put it on your Twitter. You cannot be disciplined for putting a correction on Twitter. It cannot possibly violate any of your company's social media rules, right? Your social media rules are don't use foul language, don't attack other people. You're just correcting the record. Put it on your social media. That'll get movement. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a great way to tackle that. It does look like we had a general audience question. It looks like this came from our sponsors over at the New England chapter. They wanted to know, what is the best journalistic piece of work that you've seen in the past year or so? We're getting into 2023, so you may have to think back a little ways.
Oh, that's a tough one. That's a real tough one. Trying to think. It's so much. That's an impossible question to answer.
If you need some time to think on it, I can let you formulate it kind of in your mind, and we can come back to it as well if that's easier.
Yeah, that is just, it's so hard to narrow down. I'm trying to think of what it might be. Some of the New York Times reporting on Project Veritas, James O'Keefe, has been spectacular. I think Project Veritas is now kind of going down. This is the ambush video organization that is constantly trying to embarrass journalists and what they view as left-leaning organizations. And the Times has really gotten right inside of their organization. And I would say certainly that. Let me keep thinking.
Yeah, no problem. And Claire also wanted to mention that you can also cite your own work. So if there's anything you're particularly proud of, feel free to let us know and we can check that out too.
There's no way anything has been like the best that I've read in the past year. But that doesn't mean that sometimes I think I've done a decent piece, but it's no, it's not at that level. Anything else?
I think that was all the questions we have from the chat. So if there was anyone else, you can feel free to pop that in here in the last couple of minutes. But I did want to just ask if there was ever a point in time that you think as journalists that we should behave differently in order to defend some of our prerogatives as truth tellers and try to increase our credibility with the American people. Is there any kind of time or format that you think that is going to be something we have to pay very close attention?
Oh no, we lost Loretta. I think she was trying to ask you about strategies for increasing credibility with the general public.
Okay, so yes, there are many strategies, I think. As I said before, I think the corrections thing is a huge thing. Treating people who are not accustomed to dealing with the media in generous and lenient ways, quite frankly. Number three is, we always talk about getting into the heartland of America. I think we need to get into urban America more. That's, everybody thinks, oh, we need to go out to cornfields, but we need to explore every square foot of our own cities. That's number three. And there are a lot of others too on that front, but I also think that this question of trust is an important thing to obsess about for us journalists, because we always see these studies about how there's no trust. how nobody trusts us. And the people who trust us the least, and in huge numbers, are Republicans and conservatives. And those people get their information about media performance from Fox News. So our crisis of trust is inseparable from the portraiture of the media that appears on Fox News. And it's important for us to do everything we can do to heighten trust with people who read and watch us. But we should also know and be clear about this, that the trust problem, such as it is and such as it's measured by polling outfits, will never, ever fully be remedied until Fox News stops lying about our performance.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so sorry, but things seem to glitch for a moment there. But
No,
it looks like
that's
we've
good.
got one more question from our chat. Looks like Katie said, do you think moral clauses could be put into contracts?
Morals clauses?
Mhm.
Well, they have them in cable news contracts, and I think television news contracts. Like if you screw up, if you go out at night, you get drunk and you fall on your face and and make a fool of yourself and say stupid shit, then maybe they could invoke the morals clause. So could they? I don't have a contract, but I understand myself to be living by a morals clause. So I think that I could be fired for similar reasons. Maybe articulating it in a contract for print journalists would help. I don't know. I don't think so. But they're pretty wide ranging, and obviously television news feels they need that because they're so image conscious. They care about the ratings, they care about makeup. And so they care about the morals clause. But, I don't see a lot of print journalists really, maybe I'm just being stupid here or ignoring some massive mountain of evidence, but I don't think has been a big deal with print journalists. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, looks like we've got another real good question here. With the GMA scandal still unfolding to some degree, what steps or changes are necessary in this type of situation?
What, to prevent people at work from becoming romantically involved? What specific about the situation is?
Let me see here what the context we've got. Looks like just kind of fraternizing publicly, and how that can affect the network in a more negative light, I would say.
Right. Well, the way I understand that situation is that both these people were married and they got involved in a relationship. I don't know. I mean, I never covered that story. I sort of watched from afar. So I fear that I might not be in possession of some critical fact. But fraternizing publicly to the detriment of the network. I mean, I don't, it hasn't really changed my view of ABC News and its reliability, I must say. Maybe I'm missing something, but I haven't, I don't trust ABC News any less because two of the people who worked together there became romantically involved. I know that we in our workplaces need to be very cognizant of power imbalances. I'm not sure that's the case here. I'm pretty sure it's not. So I've always read those stories with a little bit of a cocked head and thinking, what exactly is the scandal here? I know it might violate some ABC News norm or whatever, but if I had to list the top 10 problems that journalism media outlets have to conquer today, I would not put this at the top. And I should disclose that I met my wife at work. So we were both young and not particularly high ranking. There was nobody high ranking at the Washington City paper in the mid '90s. I was an editor, she was a writer, but we started seeing each other before I worked there. So I mean, it was. So I am not going to be one to like throw the flag at ABC and Amy Robach. The fellow whose name is I'm spacing now, but anyway, that's what I would say.
Okay, well, we went a little bit over time, so I just wanted to thank you first and foremost for being able to meet with us today and speak with us. It's been just an invaluable experience for all of those being able to join us today. I'm sure our viewers really appreciate all the insightful information, and I'm just grateful for all of the knowledge you've been able to impart on us today. I really want to thank you for bearing with me through all the technology issues. Modern technology, you'd think it'd be more reliable, but it's hit or miss sometimes. So if that was everything, I just wanted to again thank you so much for your time. Was there anything else you'd like to add?
I just appreciate the questions. I really love talking to people like you guys, and thank you for all your for studying up and knowing what I've done. It's very it's flattering to be asked to talk. I appreciate it.
Oh, and the honor is all ours as well. I really appreciate you taking the time out. It was a great conversation, and I hope to stay in touch.
Excellent. Have a good night.
You too. Everyone have a great night.